What will the world of JRPGs have in store for us in 2023? Well, I think I've come up with a pretty solid list of bold predictions. Some are a little less bold thanks to a few teases this week. Thanks a lot, Katase. But nonetheless, I think this will be super fun to discuss. Make sure to drop your predictions for JRPGs in 2023 in the comments below. And now let's just get right into it. The first prediction is one I think we've all seen coming for a long time, but now's the time. And that is that Final Fantasy Tactics Remastered will be announced and released in 2023. Now, here's why I think this. The first and most obvious thing is the NVIDIA GeForce Now leak. Now, if you're not familiar with this was I think 2 years ago now, where NVIDIA leaked a ton of unannounced games, and most of them have been true so far. And one of the biggest victims of this leak was Square Enix. Just a few of the games on that list were Chrono Cross Remastered, Kingdom Hearts 4, which a lot of people didn't believe but turned out to be true, as well as a new strategy game which ended up being the Diofield Chronicle. And one of the games on that list was a Final Fantasy Tactics remaster. And I think just another reason why I think this is going to happen is last year they did a remaster for Tactics Ogre, and I think that ended up doing pretty well for Square. But let's be real, Final Fantasy Tactics is definitely the more beloved game, and we're just way past due for a console port on modern consoles. Now, what will they add in this remaster? I'm sure they'll have, new HD visuals to make it look much better, maybe a few speed up mechanics, definitely fixing that slowdown in the War of the Lions port. But either way, I think this is an absolute lock for 2023. Now, speaking of leaked Square Enix games on the NVIDIA GeForce Now platform, let's talk about Final Fantasy IX Remake. I believe a Final Fantasy IX Remake will be announced this year. Now, on that NVIDIA GeForce Now list for Square Enix, it did specifically mention remasters, but then it said very specifically remake for Final Fantasy IX, not a remaster. And also, they've already remastered Final Fantasy IX for modern platforms, so there's really nothing else they can do with it. Not to mention, there's going to be a Final Fantasy IX animated series coming out this year by a studio called Cyber Group Studios. Now, I went to their website and looked at the list of shows that they've worked on in the past, and I didn't recognize any of them, but looking at them, they're more shows for children, and they've even said that this is going to be aimed at children and teens, which is kind of unfortunate. I was kind of hoping this would be an anime, but nonetheless, that is coming out. Now, I bring this up because I feel like it lends even more credence to a remake, because why would they be doing a cartoon show for Final Fantasy IX just seemingly out of complete nowhere? But if they are doing a remake, it makes total sense. Also, I find it kind of funny that they totally skipped remaking Final Fantasy VIII. Obviously, it's not very beloved, but I find it funny nonetheless. And of course, there is that fan remake of Final Fantasy IX. It seemed more like an experience or just an animation, but that's just adding fuel to the fire. Not to mention Katase-san teasing games for this year. He said, quote, "There's also another big announcement unrelated to Final Fantasy VII that I can't say much about just yet." And obviously, I think this is it. Now, it's for sure happening, but the question is, will it retain its turn-based combat? Will it go action or hybrid? How about the visual style? Is it going to go more photoreal or kind of stick with a more stylized cartoony look? Either way, I'm super excited to see what they do with it, and it's definitely getting announced this year. Now, speaking of teasing unannounced titles for 2023, let's take a look at Atlus. They also teased new announcements in their New Year's greeting card, and I can think of only one game that would be appropriate enough to fit that bill, and that would be Persona 6. So my third prediction is that Persona 6 will be announced and dated this year. Now, I don't think it's coming out this year, but it will be announced and dated. Now, obviously, this box art is fake and made by an AI, but I think it's exciting nonetheless to look at it and kind of think of the possibilities. Now, a lot of people were disappointed that Atlus didn't announce anything at their end of the year Persona concert, where they typically tend to announce things, and people didn't believe it. They thought they were lying and that they would announce something anyway, but they didn't. Also, it's been over 6 years since Persona 5 originally released in Japan, and I get that they've worked on other things like Royal, Catherine Full Body, and supposedly Project Re Fantasy. Where's that game, Atlus? But I think it's time for Persona 6. Now, we've had 3 games in a row with a pretty similar formula, so is this the game they finally kind of mix things up? Are they going to move on from the high school setting? What's the color theme going to be? Personally, I think it's going to be green, but Persona 6 is absolutely getting announced this year, and I can't wait to see what it's all about. Now, I don't know about you, but I love following industry numbers like sales figures, review scores, and things like that. I just find it fascinating. So for my next prediction, I think that Sea of Stars is going to be the highest reviewed JRPG of 2023. Now, here's my reasoning. If we take a look at years past, either two things happen. A big AAA game like Persona 5 or Dragon Quest XI end up being the highest reviewed JRPG of the year, or some kind of indie darling like last year with Chained Echoes. Now, of course, there are a lot of AAA JRPGs set to release in 2023, like Final Fantasy Fantasy 16, Grand Blue Fantasy, and more, but I think those games have a lot of high expectations. And the problem with that is when people have high expectations and they're not met, then they inevitably get disappointed. And I don't think that Final Fantasy 16 is going to disappoint necessarily, but I think Final Fantasy 16 would have to score over 90 in some sort of Metascore for it to be the highest reviewed JRPG of the year. Now, I did mention Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, and I do think that that's possible, but I don't know. I have some kind of funky feeling that there's something off about this game. There's something they're not telling us that we're just not going to like. Obviously, there's online elements, so we'll have to wait and see what ends up happening with that game. But to me, Sea of Stars has Indie Darling written all over it. Now, again, for a little bit of context, their last game, The Messenger, had an 86 on OpenCritic. Now, that's definitely high, but not enough to be the best reviewed game in its genre that year. But let's be real, JRPG reviewers will be drooling all over this game, including me. That's just my thought, but what do you think is going to be the best reviewed JRPG of the year? Drop your prediction in the comments below. Now, you guys are not going to like this next one, but I can just feel it in my bones. And that is that Blue Protocol is going to be a huge hit on par with Genshin Impact. Now, I know it sounds insane to compete with one of the biggest games in the industry right now, but I just think it's going to happen. A couple of its key features that I think people are going to fall in love with are the insane character creator. There's so much detail and things that you can do with it. A giant open world that you can explore freely with friends or by yourself, and a really cool looking action combat. Not to mention, it's free to play. Now, I know all of us OG JRPG fans would rather just pay $60 for the full game and be done with it, but these live service games are huge with the wider gaming audience, so I just think this game's going to be a big hit. Now, work with me a little bit here. Imagine a Tales game that constantly added new free content over the course of years. That sounds pretty cool to me. Now, regardless of how it's monetized, I imagine we'll be seeing articles by the end of the year about how much it's making, just like what happened with Genshin Impact. Also, Amazon is partnering on this game, which I still find really weird, so there's no way they're going to let this thing bomb. I would get ready now because the Blue Protocol wave is coming. Now, speaking of sales numbers and making money, let's talk about Final Fantasy 16. My next prediction is that Final Fantasy 16 is going to be the best-selling JRPG of the year, the fastest-selling Final Fantasy, and will be one of the top 10 selling games of the year according to NPD. Now, if you don't know what the NPD is, they track video game sales over the course of years for North America. And again, just for a little bit of context, the games that usually dominate this list are games like Call of Duty, sports games, and Grand Theft Auto. Now for 2022, Pokemon Legends Arceus and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet ranked number 6 and 7 respectively for the best-selling games of the year. So I think that's a good sign for Final Fantasy 16. Now to do this, I believe it's probably going to have to sell over 10 million copies, which would make it one of the best-selling games in the franchise. And I think that's going to make it even harder because it's a PS5 exclusive. I mean, let's be real, PS5s are still hard to find, so there may not even be enough out there for this game to reach 10 million sales. Now, the exclusivity window is only for 6 months, so it could squeak in on PC by the end of the year, but I have a funny feeling that this game's going to get delayed to July or August, so that may not happen. Now, here's something else to consider. The overall gaming community is growing with more people playing games than ever before, so I think there's a good chance that Final Fantasy 16 could see big success. Also, it's just highly anticipated, and Sony is going to pump the heck out of it with marketing. And the cool thing is that this is a next-gen exclusive, so it'll be a true showcase of what's possible. And if all this turns out to not be true, well, you can all laugh at me come 2024. And for my last prediction, we're going to be a little bit more negative. We've been silly and fun so far, but we're going to switch things up for this last one. And my final prediction is that we are not going to hear a thing about Dragon Quest XII. And I mean nothing, no trailer, no art, definitely no release date, and no way it comes out in 2023. Now, why do I say this? When they originally announced the game, all it was a logo and some very vague details about how they might be changing the game up and how it's going to be a little bit darker, but that was pretty much it. Now, I feel like if it was more imminent, they would be showing gameplay, or at least more than just a logo splash screen. And for a little history lesson, Dragon Quest XI was announced in July of 2015, but didn't release for another 2 years in Japan. Now, I know this isn't Square, but again, Persona 5 initially released in 2013, but didn't release for another 3 years. To say the least, JRPG developers seem to be taking their sweet time these days. Now, in its place, I do think we're gonna get some Dragon Quest games. For one, I think that Dragon Quest 2D HD game is way overdue. It's been silent for a long time, and I think 2023 is finally the year for it to release. And maybe Dragon Quest Builders 3, pretty please? One can dream. Now, if you want to hear about all the JRPGs that have been officially confirmed for 2023, make sure you check out this video right here. And if you love Japanese role-playing games and want to stay up to date all year long with the latest news, reviews, and other fun videos, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.